I never considered myself a very loving man, and it had always been that way until 7 years ago when she became my wife. Actually, this was the turning point of my steadfastness and mental capability. I understood clearly that this had been my choice, that she was my other half. In my previous relationship, I couldn't have been more wrong about love. I thought everything was great, and in the end, it ended traumatically. After the wedding, we started living together in a house we bought, even though my wife's mother had a nice house in the suburbs where she lived alone and could accommodate us. However, we wanted to have our own life. After all, my in-laws' life wasn't going well, and when we met, my father-in-law decided that my wife would raise their daughter alone. I don't condemn his decision, but I still hear resentment in my wife's voice when she remembers her father. A year after we got married, my wife made me truly happy. The news that we would soon become parents thrilled me and began to change me as a person. I literally carried my wife in my arms. I didn't want to leave her, not for a minute. I ran to the store at night when my beloved urgently needed something salty. She shared with her mother and friends how I treated her, and I only received approval and loving words from them. Sometimes I thought that my beloved mother-in-law praised me, often more than my beloved wife, but I attributed it to my wife's pregnancy and her constant mood swings and discomfort. 3 months after finding out I would be a father, my wife and I went for a routine ultrasound when the doctor asked us if we knew we were having twins. I literally started jumping around the doctor's office like a baby and shouting with joy. My beloved, meanwhile, covered her face with her hands, and amidst uninterrupted sobs, I realized she was crying. "What's wrong, honey? Don't cry, or are these tears of happiness?" I asked. "Henry, are you happy?" She cut me off sharply. "It's not one, it's two. You see two. Well, that's a good thing. It's double the joy," I tried to encourage her. "You have 2 breasts, so you have 2 babies," I tried to joke. "Too bad your brain is one and that one doesn't work," she replied harshly. It took 3 whole days for my wife to stop crying and decide to go to her mother's house to deliver this news personally and not leave her in shock over the phone. All this time, I had known Addison as an extremely polite and reserved woman. However, when we told her about our pregnancy and the fact that it was twins, it was as if a volcano erupted inside her. She laughed or cried, but her tears were warm and gentle. She was genuinely happy. In fact, she immediately started calling herself Grandma. Suddenly, she threw a joke at me that erased the boundaries between us completely. "Honestly, Henry, I was beginning to think that your cannon was out of service and the projectiles were empty," Addison joked. I hadn't laughed so joyfully in a long time. Despite my wife's comments to her mother, the joke didn't seem too vulgar or explicit to me. Strangely, the pregnancy passed by very quickly. My wife gave birth to the most beautiful babies we named Julian and Anna. It was decided in a family council that my mother-in-law would help us for the first month. She took time off and moved into our apartment. And that's when it all began. My wife became very nervous and irritable. She constantly said she had stopped feeling like a woman and considered herself only as food for our twins. My mother-in-law tried to calm her down, but in the end, it only created more conflicts at home. The twins took turns sleeping. For a month, there was never a moment when they both slept at the same time. I went to work as if it were a holiday. But there, despite the pile of papers and many tasks, I could somehow rest. My mother-in-law also confessed to me that she didn't realize she loved her job so much. Meanwhile, the month ended, and Addison had to leave us to return to work. My wife began to have increasingly difficult periods. She started to act more aggressively and indifferent. There were times when she locked herself in the bathroom to avoid hearing the baby's cries. Realizing that my wife couldn't handle the children, I worked remotely and took care of the babies during the day. This went on for another 10 months, and I thought it couldn't get worse, but then the children started walking. I felt like an animal trainer. While Julian tried to shove something into the toilet, Anna was washing her hands in the same bathroom. When Anna fell asleep, Julian felt it was his duty to go to her and poke his sister with his finger. In short, we were not able to handle them. We began to take out our anger and fatigue on each other, and there were some scandals. Once, when my mother-in-law came to visit and heard our argument, my wife and I were reprimanded in a way that I will remember for the rest of my life. "You just need a smack on the butt," my mother-in-law summed up. It was at that moment that I pictured my mother-in-law wearing tall black boots, a tight sheer blouse, and instead of a belt, a leather whip in her hands. "Give me a smack, Addison," I couldn't contain myself and shouted out loud. Both women looked at me with a questioning glance. "If necessary, I'll put a sock in your mouth instead of a gag so you won't spout any nonsense," my mother-in-law softened my impudence. After a while, my life changed completely. My wife stopped feeding the children and decided to get a job. I continued to work remotely to make things easier for the kids, including financially. We stopped renting an apartment and moved into Addison's house. My wife would leave early for work and come back quite late, so she only saw the children and me sleeping. She decided to dedicate herself to work, and I must say she did it very well. As for me, she grew cold and indifferent. I could feel it, but the man in me was prevailing, and when everyone was asleep, I literally begged for my 10 minutes of conjugal duty. Addison, on the other hand, was much easier. We spent time together, raised my children, had tea parties, went for walks, watched TV together. I started to notice that I liked her smell. It was somehow numbing and very alluring. When she went for a walk and put on her tight pants, I couldn't take my eyes off her ass, which moved slightly as she walked. One day, Addison was mopping the floor and I was walking around looking at my phone. By chance, we bumped into each other with her back to me and me facing her. I immediately felt the desire, which was clearly visible. To my surprise, my mother-in-law fixed her hair with her hand and lightly licked her lips. How to understand this, I didn't know, and I decided to just pretend that nothing happened. The next day, we were cooking together and my knife fell on the floor. My mother-in-law leaned over to pick it up and the neckline of her blouse dropped and I saw her underwear, which barely covered her breasts. Once again, I felt a strong rush of blood hit my private parts. I couldn't contain myself. "Is there something you want to tell me?" she asked. "I'm afraid of saying too much," I replied, barely containing myself. "Or maybe I want you to say too much," she told me softly. I started acting like a teenager, pacing back and forth, and then I declared myself to her. I knew this was wrong, because she was my mother-in-law, but my wife didn't want to be with me anymore and it was killing me. My wife once came back from a business trip and admitted to cheating on me with her boss. To say I was very, very upset would be a lie. In a way, I was even happy, because morally I had been cheating on my wife for a long time and with no one other than her own mother. We have decided that until the children are older we will make it look like a happy family, and in a few years we will decide how to proceed. The weather outside was freezing. My wife was away again on another business trip. I was home alone with the kids and Addison was visiting a friend. After putting my twins to bed, I waited a long time for my mother-in-law to arrive. She arrived at midnight, excited and a little drunk. As she told me later, she had been drinking wine with a friend all night. She had left the house without an umbrella and was soaking wet. I could see she was freezing. Entering her room, I started to help her take off her wet coat, her wet dress, and that's when I noticed how she was in front of me, with her underwear also wet. "That's wet too," I said, and with a slight movement of my hand, I unbuttoned it up. She didn't resist. We spent the whole night together, one of the best nights of my life. My desirable Addison was indeed desired that night, and the next morning I woke up alone. There was a note on the table that said everything that happened was a mistake. It was the effect of alcohol and nothing more. It must stay between us. I'm going to my sister's, and I'm going to live there. Your children can now go to daycare. You'll manage without me. I'm going to tell my daughter that I'm going to take care of my sick sister. Don't call me and don't remember what happened. I tore up the note and threw it away, but I couldn't get one of the best nights of my life out of my mind. For years past, we got divorced and the children, to our surprise, were very calm with the news. My ex-wife often took them to see the sea, to the house of her new husband, her ex-boss. Today is a beautiful summer day. The kids went on vacation to their mother and I'm sitting on the plane counting down the minutes until landing. I'm tired of hiding it and feeling miserable every day. Yes, she is my ex-wife's mother. Yes, she is older than me. But damn, she's the person I was unrealistically good with and could be even better with. As I got off the plane, I remembered that all of this should never have happened, and for the sake of my children I would try to never think about my ex-mother-in-law again. If love caught me once, there will definitely be someone else out there who will make me really happy.